Okay, I was going through Genesis currently, and I landed in chapter 20. So I thought I'd share a little bit about what I saw there. You can read along or move along, I don't care. Yeah, so Genesis chapter 20. Now, mathematically, 20 is preceded by 19 and 18. And those two previous chapters is where God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, bringing judgment to those wicked cities. And in 20 here, it leaves off where Lot and his daughters did that which ought not be done. And he picks back up now with Abraham. So, in Genesis 20, verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur. So Abraham and his family and his servants, all his possessions were in Mamre by the terebinth trees. This was where the Lord visited Abraham, where these angels visited him. These three who are being sent to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy it because of its great sinfulness. Well, one to witness and two to destroy. Here the angel of the Lord, I believe the pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ was one of those three. The Lord himself, yes. Remember we saw in chapter 18, Abraham, when these angels approached him, he treated them with high respect. And he and Sarah made an awesome meal and treated them with great hospitality. The Lord told Abraham that he and his wife were going to have a son. And Sarah laughed. She could see how old she was. She could see how old Abraham was. Yeah, she laughed and the Lord heard her. And so anyway, they decided to help God in achieving this promise. And so they agreed to have the Egyptian servant of Sarah, a gal named Hagar, to be a surrogate mother for Sarah. Remember, God doesn't need our help in accomplishing his purposes. No, usually won't turn out very well if we try to do that. Well, then we see after this that the angel showed up at Lot's house, like they did at Abraham's place, and he greeted them with honor, similar to Abraham. He made them a feast and baked some unleavened bread. And while they were eating, the pride community showed up at his house, knocking on the door, trying to knock it down. And we remember Lot and his family had to be practically dragged out of the city. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, along with the cities around there, they were toast, burnt toast. So after this, it says in chapter 20 now, that Abraham went from Mamre to the south, and he ends up on the land of a Philistine guy named Abimelech. So you got the Canaanites to the north. To the west, you got the Jebusites, just next door. The Hittites to the south, and a little southwest, the Philistines. And just to get a sense of time when this is, chapter 20, think about this. It's only been about 50 years, I think, since Noah passed away. Yeah. Noah lived to be about 950 years old. And Abraham is like the 9th or 10th generation of those who walked off the ark themselves. So some of that whole flood thing is probably still a little fresh in the minds of some around there, if not a lot of people on the earth still at this point. But the earth is being populated, and the tribes and growing families are starting to spread out and scatter everywhere. And so Abimelech, this guy named Abimelech, is really, when you think about it, he's Abraham's distant cousin, twice removed on his uncle's side, 3 times by marriage, etc., so on and so on. Probably a descendant of Noah's son Ham is my best guess. I think in chapter 10 of Genesis it describes Ham's descendants, and I believe Egypt is mentioned there along with a guy named Nimrod. We all know who Nimrod is. The Canaanites, the Philistines, they all came from a guy who stepped off the ark with Noah, one of his sons, named Ham. Yeah. Now his brother Shem, walking off that plank onto dry ground. Now that is where Abraham comes from, through the line of Shem, his great-great-great-grandfather or whatever. And Abraham was born about 292 years after the flood. And now he travels south from Mamre down into the area where these young Philistines are living. So finally, verse 2. Now Abraham said to his wife Sarah, Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Yeah, just took her. Your sister, he's thinking, sweet, I think I'll take her. Thanks, mate. Now, I have heard it said we should learn from our mistakes. But Abe here is telling the same lie he told back in Egypt to one of the pharaohs there. Very same lie. Out of fear. Same excuse. He told Sarah, look, they will see that you are beautiful and they're going to kill me. And after I'm dead, they're going to take you. So say you are my sister. Yeah, it's the same lie. Same lie he says right now. He didn't learn yet. Now, maybe he was right about Pharaoh. Maybe Pharaoh would have killed him to get Sarah. We don't know. But I think Abimelech here is way different than Pharaoh. He seems to be a pretty straight up guy. So he and Sarah say this lie again to Abimelech this time. Now in life, we compromise what we know to be true too often. We do it for many reasons, but most always these reasons are for personal reasons. Pride, fear, greed, or whatever. And are almost always associated with a lack of faith. A lack of obedience for sure. And yet we read about Abraham not being very faithful here. But in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, a chapter we often call the Hall of Faith, Abraham, he's in it. He's in that Hall of Faith. But right here, he's not seeming very faithful, no. So here in Genesis 20, and back in chapter 12, it has nothing to do about faith except its lack thereof. But yes, like us, he and Sarah are as much human as we are. So I can look at my life and see areas where my faith is tried and my flesh does battle and too often wins and I go down in flames. And I find myself saying or doing something apart from faith. And as a result, I find myself, again, in a place that is less than desirable so. Now, in verse 3 it says, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man, because the woman you have taken, she is a man's wife. It seems God takes this whole marriage thing pretty seriously, even way back then, as should we. And it also appears Abimelech knows this as well. God didn't have to explain that part to him. A friend of mine recently, a guy named Fee, he gave me food for thought about how some of God's instructions that are given to man are instilled in us, knowing right from wrong. It's our conscience. And it's maybe possible that Abimelech knew this simply by his God-given conscience. I like that, though. That's pretty good. And it's quite possible, or could possibly be a practice sanctioned by God, that people are still honoring marriage at this point in time in history, just after the flood. Because the flood is still fresh on their minds. Yeah. So that knowledge that Noah passed on to these people, his sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, great-great-great-great-grandsons, as they got off the ark and started to spread out, in either way, Abimelech was aware of the sanctity of marriage. It goes on in verse 4, but Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Remember, Abimelech recently saw that exactly what God did just down the road to Sodom and Gomorrah, not very long ago. And he would seem to know why God did it, because of the unrighteousness and sin that ruled in that place. So Abimelech made the claim, that was a righteous judgment. He's saying, that was a righteous judgment, but me? What have I done? And then he lays out his case before God. Genesis 20, verse 5. Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And even she herself said, he's my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. That's a pretty good defense, if you ask me. And now, in Abraham's defense, I say that half-heartedly, it was just a little white lie. And actually, he wasn't lying completely. They weren't lying. She was his half-sister, but a half lie is still a whole lie. And then God continues speaking to Abimelech here, verse 6. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. So God does not discount his statement. He even agrees, I know you did this in the integrity of your heart, Abimelech. So I see Abimelech might not have been such a bad guy. He had an integrity of heart here. And it says God honored that integrity by that is God himself kept Abimelech from touching Sarah. The Lord even said that by doing so, by Abimelech touching Sarah, he would have sinned against the Lord himself. And God didn't let him touch her. God intervened here. Verse 7. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all yours. So God says of Abraham that he's a prophet. And then he goes on, this kind of a predicament now for that Abimelech's in. The kind of predicament Abraham is in is all due to this lack of judgment, this lack of faith, this trusting God with everything we are and everything we have. I am guilty way too often of falling short here. Now think about this. When we sin, whether it be lying or whatever, stepping out of our faith, not to be confused with stepping out in faith, but stepping out of faith, not only does it affect us, but others all around us. So what does Abimelech do? Verse 8. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and he called all his servants, and he told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. So he got up early, first thing in the morning, and when he shared this with his people, they were afraid, because they too remember what just happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. What does Abimelech do next? Verse 9. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? How have I offended you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me which not ought be done. Verse 10. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you were doing this thing? He's saying, what in the heck were you thinking, man? This was wrong. What you did to me was not right. No, you set me up, dude. You almost got me vaporized like Sodom. Only I did nothing to you to deserve any of this. And not only did you jeopardize me, but my whole kingdom and everyone here. See, Abimelech knows that this could have resulted in his kingdom being set in ashes, just like his whoring neighbors, the Sodomites next door. Excuse me. Well, they're not next door anymore. No. And here comes Abraham's reasoning, or maybe his excuses, in verse 11, I think here. And Abraham said, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. See, Abraham was prejudging another man's heart here. Wrong. Prejudging others and lumping them in with those other cities, flying their rainbow flags and living their ungodly lifestyles. Abimelech at least was trying to live right, by what we can tell by his conversation with God that he just had. And we see he takes God at his word that his judgments are not only righteous, but thorough. Sin is not a playground, something to toy with or take lightly. Consequences are severe and encompassing, and I think Abimelech understood this. Abraham was assuming that Abimelech was just like the Pharaoh. Yeah, prejudging. And thinking the worst out of fear. But Abraham continues in his splaining to Abimelech, saying in verse 12, but indeed she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. Half-truth, still a lie. Still no excuse. And it's kind of funny here how Abraham didn't say, yeah, she is my sister, and she is my wife. He said, and she became my wife. I almost sense a little bit of Adam's splaining here. How Adam, his explanation to God in the garden as to why he was hiding from God and why he ate the fruit. It was the woman you gave me, Lord. And then he continues in the same mode here in verse 13. He says, "And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, wherever we go, say of me, he's my brother." Yeah, he's still speaking Adamish here. And it came to pass, it says. It just happened, not sure how. And when God caused me, God called me to this place. No, he said, God caused me. God caused me to wander, he even says. Not God called me to this place. No, he was just out wandering around and stumbled here. And he continued about how he told Sarah to play along. This is your kindness that you should do for me in every place, wherever we go. Say of me, he's my brother. So he's fessing up and letting Abimelech know that Sarah was only doing it in obedience and faithfulness to her husband, which is true. Think about this for a second, though. What kind of position did this put Sarah in? I mean, she was probably taken into a harem of sort, being he is a king, Abimelech is, and Abraham as well. The king would make treaties with other kings, and they would seal the deal by giving a beautiful daughter or a sister, I guess, as a gift, as a sign of peace between the two differing factions, the two different, countries, for lack of a better word here. So poor Sarah now, yeah, maybe my husband's going to live and not be killed by us saying this. But what about me? Am I going to have to bed down with this dude? Abraham didn't think of that. How his little lie would affect his wife. How many times probably had Abimelech and Sarah talked? How many times did she make excuses to make sure she was not next in line on the casting couch? I'm thinking maybe there were times, probably often, where they had some heart-to-heart talks. And Abimelech maybe is starting to really like her. She's good looking after all. Yes, and he starts to like her and probably wants her. And finally, he's saying, someone closer to my age. Someone I can relate to. She really understands me. Poor Sarah. Bad spot to be put in. Especially by your husband. But God protected her. We know that. And yes, our actions apart from faith have consequences, far-reaching consequences. And not only that, think about what else Sarah might have been dealing with because of this little white lie. How often was Sarah thinking about where her husband is during this whole time? Remember back in Genesis 16, Sarah had Abraham father a child with her maid Hagar. Remember then when she got pregnant and watched Hagar have his child, there was a little drama in the house. Little is probably not the right word. There was some animosity and jealousy going on that rose up, So much so that Hagar split. She had to get away from Sarah. But because she and Abraham acted apart from faith. They acted apart from faith. And the Lord met Hagar, and he told her to go back to Sarah and submit to her, and she did. Now here in chapter 20, Sarah is having to fight off the advances of Abimelech, at the same time knowing that back at home, in her tent, in her home, is Abraham, her husband, and his firstborn son Ishmael, and Hagar in that same house. That woman, that Hagar, the other woman, poor Sarah. Nothing hardly compares with those types of thoughts. Wondering and not knowing, the very one who you feel threatens your marriage, your covenant, the one who you know your husband had a child by, is now there with him, and you're not. Those desert nights can get awfully cold and lonely, and inside that warm tent is Hagar. Hagar's with him tonight. Has he forgotten about me? Oh, am I stuck here, but he has everything else, a future, which I guess now doesn't include me. He's got his son. He's got his life. He's got Hagar. Can you see what poor Sarah is having to deal with here? All because Abraham let fear creep in, and this is what happens. He acted in fear, not faith. So now in Genesis 14, moving right along, 14 says, Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, male and female servants, and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. So he did what the Lord told him to do, give Sarah back to her husband. Verse 15, And Abimelech said, See, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. Mikasa e sukasa. Abimelech, showing great forgiveness and grace here, he could have said, Here's your wife back, Abe. Now hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more. Oh, and don't let the door hit you in the rear. He could have said that. But no, he heard what God said about Abraham, and he honored him, and he blessed him for who God said he was. Not because he was worthy of it, nor deserved it, but because God said, He's mine. Abimelech had every right to throw him out, and God didn't tell Abimelech to bless Abraham. He told him simply to restore Sarah back to him. Verse 16 then says, Then he said to Sarah, Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. Yeah, I love how Abimelech here lets Sarah know how he feels about this and her part in it. Behold, I have given your brother all this silver. And she didn't say, your husband. I've given your husband this silver. I think he's kind of making his point. He's letting her know that her part in this lie, in which she played up during their little courtship conversations, courtship on his part, I'm assuming. But yeah, he is not pleased that she played this out so well. And Abimelech did not appreciate this. No, don't blame him. Frankly, he didn't deserve it. Often our screw-ups in life affect others, even when they don't deserve it. It's on us. Now, verse 17 says, So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. And then they bore him children. Verse 18, For the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So, that ends the chapter there. So apparently, they played this game of charades for quite some time. As when they first rolled the dice on the game board, the women in Abimelech's life could not get pregnant. His wife were his servants. But after Abraham and Sarah fessed up and prayed about it, confessed it before God and before the offended, God blessed those who were affected by this lack of judgment, this lack of faith. Yeah, the lack of on both parts. This disobedience. One last thing I thought of. Yes, as creatures of habit, sometimes we're thick-headed and we repeat things, like Abraham did here. Same lie. But our behavior, our walk of faith is being examined continually by our children. Let's behave. Let's live out our faith honestly and openly. Because we see later in a couple chapters here, just a couple chapters forward, that Abraham's son, his promised son, Isaac, he makes this same exact mistake that Abraham did twice. Like father, like son, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Let's make sure the fruit falling all around us is good fruit, born in faith, rooted in faith, and watered with obedience. Husbands, don't compromise your faith in any way which would put your wife in an uncomfortable position. Wives, don't agree to your husband's plans of unfaithfulness when they're obviously contrary to faith. Encourage him, help him in creative ways to grow in his faith. And yes, the kids, make sure they don't learn to compromise. But try and have them see faith at work in your home, in your marriage. Yeah. Learn by your mistakes. That's a good saying. But I say, how about we learn by others' mistakes? So we don't make the same mistakes ourselves in order to learn. No, let's learn by their mistakes. Easier. So there, just some thoughts on Genesis chapter 20. Abraham, Sarah, and Abimelech.